Welcome everyone to Class 1A. My name is Dylan, bringing you another My Hero Academia chapter breakdown. This week we have chapter 371, Together with Shoji. And a bit of a spoiler, it's an incredible chapter. Hori is back and making some good chapters, so you're in for a treat here. We kick off the chapter back in Shoji versus Spinner. In his unclear thinking, the Heteromorph group keeps interpreting Spinner's ramblings into rallying cries. Yes, finally, Horikoshi is back. We got some good stuff going here. I'm in love with this chapter and what's going on right now. Comics have forever been a way to talk about social commentary through this medium, since the beginning of comics. And Horikoshi, using his Western comic influence, is finally doing that in My Hero. I mean, he's done it in some other places, but here it's really underscored, and it's so good. It is so incredibly good. Now, obviously, I wish we would have gotten some more of this stuff earlier on. We've gotten sprinkles of it throughout My Hero. They've talked about the heteromorph issue constantly throughout My Hero and Vigilantes, sprinkling it in here and there, especially in the manga. But now that we're actually getting it front and center, I'm in love with it. It's such a good chapter here. But I really want to know more about this rep. Is he just a tendril of All for One doing his bidding? Or is he really, truly behind this issue? Spinner didn't just get a buff from All for One here though. He also got scale mail armor. Okay, we have to talk about this panel. We have to talk about this panel. Shigaraki just being a League of Legends solo queue player is hilarious and 100% on brand for him. And I really love this, the slight flashes that Spinner's having of why him and Shigaraki were friends in the first place. Because yeah, when we met Shigaraki, he really was just an edgy gamer when we first met him. And I only say that slightly tongue-in-cheek. It shows that Spinner's thinking and his thoughts are still his own, even just a little bit. Even if mostly it is clouded by AFO and all of the quirks that he's been injected with, Spinner is still in there somewhere. And honestly, it is really sad because at the end of the day, Spinner does have real causes that he's fighting for. I mean, he was a follower of Stain. He is a heteromorph that is fighting for his own rights here, but all of that is just being cut through by AFO and his clouded judgment. And as the heteromorph rep rallies his fighters, Shoji thinks back to Class 1A. Okay, and I think they're just stating the obvious here, but yeah, the rest of Class 1A obviously has seen his face. He didn't hide it from everybody. I'm glad they're kind of showing it though, because yeah, it is a little bit unknown if they would have seen it or not. And I love that we're finally getting the backstory of Shoji. Obviously, I would have liked to seen it sprinkled a little bit earlier on, but we're getting it now, and it's really good. I think the dynamic that they paint between the heteromorphs in the city and in the countryside is really interesting on how the countryside is completely different than what's going on in the city. I mean, even in the city, we've seen the problems show themselves through the cracks, whether it's in Vigilantes where they couldn't get their own restaurant, so they have to open up in a special little area, or things that weren't catered to heteromorphs. We saw that there was a lot of heteromorphs who are bigger than normal people, and they couldn't fit inside normal restaurants, so they had to open up their own just for them. Because what is going on in the countryside is really brutal. I mean, they're having blood purges. That's insane stuff that's going on, in such a big difference than how everyone's being treated in the city. And I love Shoji's backstory here because it's so him. I mean, he only needs one good memory of saving someone in the past to really drive him forward here. He's able to hold on to that memory and still keep going forward. Because even with all that, he has such a hard burden here. He has to cover his face because he wants to make sure that he is a good representation of heteromorphs everywhere as a hero, not to just scare everyone. That's such a huge burden that he places on himself, and he just carries it. The fact that he's a hero in the public light, but he has to hide away his true self. And not only that, but he knows that things aren't going to change immediately, not even in his own generation. He's fighting for future generations so they don't have to deal with this problem. And James and I were actually talking about this chapter a few days ago when we read the leaks, and there is this interesting problem that they don't explicitly talk about that I think is probably here, about how some heteromorphs are probably more palatable than others. Ones that are pretty familiar, like Tokuyami, who's just a bird, or even the one detective who is just a cat. They're probably a lot more quote-unquote palatable to people who are non-heteromorphs than people like Shoji or Koda, who are things that aren't very known, or things that people haven't seen before. So not only is there this dynamic between heteromorphs that live in the countryside and live in the city, but there's probably also a dynamic between ones who are far outside of what people normally see, and ones that are more animal-based, that people are more comfortable with and more lighthearted to. Or even ones that people are familiar with, but maybe even more scared of, people who are more insect-based. We saw some that were in Vigilantes that were just grasshoppers. I'm assuming people will probably be very afraid of them, as opposed to, if a detective dog shows up. And we end the chapter with Koda and Shoji fighting Spinner and the Rep. Okay, and there's just so much here. Like, obviously I was going into how much I like it, but it's amazing and it feels really good because it feels like Horikoshi is firing on all cylinders here. I mean, especially after the last couple months of chapters that honestly felt a little bit flat, it feels so good to get some really good chapters with some characters that we don't get a lot of time with. And what I think makes this so great is that the Heteromorph army here is correct. Like, yes, they were discriminated against. There is bad things happening. Like I said, in the countryside, there's literal blood purges. They should be mad and they should be rising up and bringing this problem to the forefront because society's not doing anything for them. But again, in My Hero fashion, they kind of underscore it with what does it really mean to be a hero here? Like, even though they are facing all this great injustice, is it right that innocent bystanders should be caught in the crossfire here? Because Shoji says no, that shouldn't be the case. These are real problems that need to be addressed, but we're not going to take the innocent civilians and put them in danger's way just because of this. Instead, let's take that and let's try to change society and push forward for future generations so no one has to face discrimination and no one has to be hurt in the crossfire. And again, underscoring just how bad and evil of a villain AFO is here, of using just like this social cause to further his own agenda in a completely selfish way, because obviously AFO does not care about that Heteromorph issue at all. And I really hope the chapters are picking up from here because this rocks. This is incredible. I assume that this entire little like mini arc that we're having right now with Shoji and Koda, it's going to be good. It's going to be great. I just hope that the follow-ups from that are going to continue to be really good. So next up, obviously, we're going to get this really awesome 2v2 fight between the Rep, Spinner, Shoji, and Koda here. It's going to be a really good fight. I'm excited because I want to see Koda and Shoji really pop off with their quirks because we haven't seen them really go above and beyond with them yet. We've only seen their quirks in a very lighthearted way, nothing like above and beyond. So I want to see what it looks like when it really, really goes off. And I think the conclusion of this really is going to be the Heteromorph army getting stopped, but I still think Kurogiri is going to get released. I think that is the trade-off here of where they're able to save the civilians, they're able to stop the army, but Kurogiri is going to get released because I think that's what kind of advances the entire story overall. And overall, the chapter rips, it's really awesome, and I hope we keep going on with some good stuff. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next class.